Number 10, Superman and Wonder Woman. Superman and Wonder Woman in theory sound like a great couple, but for many readers, these two coming together really shook up the status quo in a way that a lot of fans weren't actually a huge fan of. Superman, after all, has long been shipped with Lois Lane, and seeing a reality where the two didn't come together was pretty heartbreaking. And then of course for Wonder Woman, that is Steve Trevor, although I feel like fans, myself included, weren't as heartbroken over the loss of that long-term relationship. At least, I know I wasn't. I don't know. Maybe everybody else really ships the two of them together super hard. I don't know. Maybe there was a lot of really passionate Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman fans out there. Booster Gold even expressed his own shock over Wonder Woman and Superman ending up together. For him, the couple was the end of the world. Literally. Booster Gold at one point has to travel back to the future in order to save his own future, but ends up being too late as it turns out what he was meant to stop was Superman and Wonder Woman getting together. But at this point, they already have. Technically, this relationship happened in what was considered to be the Prime Earth main continuity at the time, and this Superman was supposed to be the new version of the character. But this was also a Superman who ultimately was relegated to being kind of like an alt-reality version, in the sense that his New Earth version basically took his place as the Superman in continuity after he passed away. Well, they kind of get combined, but basically the version that was with Wonder Woman no longer really exists as we know him to exist, or we knew him to exist originally, with their relationship kind of just being forgotten. Number 9, Old Batman and Ra's al Ghul? This one comes to us from Batman Beyond, where we see Old Man Bruce as Terry McGinnis, the new future Batman's mentor. Old Bruce at one point reconnects with an old flame, who has still kept her youth, Talia al Ghul. The problem? It isn't really Talia, but Raish, disguised with Talia's body, who is hoping to poach Batman's body for his own and use the Lazarus Pits to make Bruce's form young again. Not so he can necessarily be with young Bruce, but so he can steal his body. The two share a nostalgic and romantic evening though, before any of this is revealed, even at one point sharing a kiss. So there it is, it happened. Number 8, Batman and Batgirl. In the animated film Killing Joke, we literally almost see these two get intimate on screen. Obviously, we cut away for the actual lead, but it was heavily implied. And in the comics, we also saw Barbara Gordon, daughter of Commissioner Gordon, Batman's good friend, and Bruce Wayne get shipped together really awkwardly in a comic based on the animated Batman Beyond series. In this comic, it's revealed that not only did Barbara and Bruce have an intimate relationship while Dick was actually absent, but we also learned that Bruce got her pregnant as well. Just double yikes. So many yikes. I don't have enough yikes for this video. Number 7, Wonder Woman and Batman. There are a few different alternate realities where Batman and Wonder Woman get together. I think one of my favorites is the one from a potential future that Wonder Woman saw via Martian Manhunter's device, the Transconsciousness Articulator. It basically allows you to dive deep into your subconscious, and when Diana was mulling over whether or not to act on her feelings toward Batman, she saw a potential future for them in her mind, where they grew older together. However, because she didn't age the same as a divine being as Bruce did, there came a day when Bruce was old enough to want to pass on, and Diana had to come to terms with letting him go. I don't know why, but that reality is always one that I just come back to when I think of them together. It's like both sad and beautiful, and ultimately in JLA 90, as Wonder Woman looks into her subconscious, I'd say that's how she feels at that time about a potential relationship with Bruce. It would be sad, it would be beautiful, it would be great, but also tragic, according to, where her mind is at. Anyways. Number 6, Batman and Cheetah. Batman and Cheetah got together almost in the DC animated universe. They didn't so much get together and go on a date as flirt though, and allude to the potential chemistry that could be between them if they chose to get together. And I'm not gonna lie, I kinda ship it. Admittedly, Batman was likely just flirting with Cheetah to manipulate the villain and get himself free, as he was kidnapped at the time, but regardless, it did seem like sparks could fly between the two, even if Batman didn't need to use his sense of compassion and charm to get free of his bonds. And the two did share a kiss while Batman was in captivity, so, could happen. I ship it. Number 5, Superman and Supergirl. We've actually seen these two get married in the comics, although it was a strange sight. At least those two versions of our heroes were not confirmed, not related. Linda Danvers tied the knot with Silver Age Superman, and technically Linda Danvers, while still Supergirl, was not actually Superman's cousin at all. She's her own thing. Her story was a lot more complex than that. Linda and Kal-El would even have a child together, Aurelia, but although this doesn't seem as weird when given the context, it was also once implied in Action Comics issue 289 that if Superman could marry anyone, he'd want to marry his cousin. At least that's what Superman said when Kara revealed she'd been trying to play matchmaker and find Superman a suitable woman to marry. Yikes! What? Look, it was a different time period. Is it a time period where you could maybe marry your cousin? I don't know. Number 4, John Stewart and Hawkgirl. These two are a ship that comes to us from the DCAU, DC's animated universe. Hawkgirl and John Stewart were both colleagues in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series, and their relationship evolved from there, with them becoming close friends and then ending up in a relationship together. However, the relationship ended for a time after Hawkgirl's people came and attacked Earth. I mean, that'll ruin a relationship, am I right? Eventually, the two would make their way back to one another, but Hawkgirl and John Stewart are a couple that many hope to see appear additionally in the main continuity of the comics. That is how popular this alternate relationship is, and even I ship it. Number 3, Batman and Harley Quinn. Batman and Harley has to be one of the most surprising ships out there, but even they have ended up together in the White Knight universe. Here, Harley Quinn actually ended up leaving the Joker because of how unstable he was, although she also at one point was in love with him still. Known as Jack here, he eventually gets help and medication and he becomes well, which leads to him and Harley getting back together. During this time, they become engaged and she even gets pregnant. In this reality, Batman is ultimately painted as actually the one who needs to be reined in, as he doesn't even acknowledge how unstable he truly is. And unfortunately, as Jack attempts to kind of like take Batman down, he loses himself again, which leads to him dying in the battle between them. Batman gets arrested, but afterwards becomes closer to Harley, also realizing that he actually needs help. At one point, he even breaks out of prison temporarily in order to help Harley, and also has a custom Batman-inspired Harley Quinn outfit made for her. How cool is that? Number 2, Batman and Phantasm. Andrea Beaumont in the animated universe was a young love of Bruce's. The two fell in love during their time together at Gotham University and were even engaged to be married, but Andrea had to break off the engagement as she and her father were leaving to go to Europe. Her father was involved in a criminal money laundering racket and had stolen money from the mob bosses that he worked for, turning it into a profitable fortune all its own. To escape his insidious partners, who probably would kill him if they found out about his theft, he left Gotham and hid himself and Andrea in Europe. Eventually, her father's location was sold out and he ended up murdered by those he'd betrayed years before. Andrea, unable to accept this injustice, took her father's fortune and used it to train and get equipment to turn herself into the masked vigilante known as Phantasm, returning to Gotham years later to get revenge on those responsible. I mean, how can you not ship those two? I mean, perfect for each other. Both vigilantes. Both kind of crazy. Number 1, Zatanna and Nightwing. Kind of an odd pairing, especially considering the times in the comics and in the other areas of the animated universe that Zatanna has been shipped with Bruce. But apparently, some fans of Young Justice are pretty fond of this alternate reality relationship, so hey. These two were really only shipped together in season 1 of Young Justice. Even in this reality, Nightwing inevitably ends up with one of his most popular ships from the main comic book continuity, Barbara Gordon. But some still were holding out hope for Zatanna Zatara and Nightwing to eventually end up back together. Number 10, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. That's right, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were actually a thing for a while in the comics. And no, I'm not just talking about when Elizabeth Olsen, who plays Wanda in the MCU, and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays Pietro, were in the 2014 film Godzilla together and were cast as each other's romantic partners. Although that did happen, and honestly, I wish I was talking about that, but I'm not. This happened in canon in the comics, but at least it was only ultimately canon in another universe. That's right, these two were hinted at and then fully revealed to be a couple in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, despite also still being siblings in that universe. And if you're trying to find some kind of justification for them to come together this way, if you're pondering if the two perhaps, just didn't know they were siblings before they got together, something weird like that, alas, no. Although that still wouldn't make it okay in my mind, just as the relationship between Nightcrawler and his adopted sister Amanda Sefton will never be justifiable for me. This was written as just a straight up, full-on, creepy brother-sister romance, and it happened, and we have to deal with it now. And now you have to deal with it, I'm sorry. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that like button. I wish you could click love button. We don't have one of those yet on YouTube. Let's start a petition. Love buttons. Number 9. Iron Man and Pepper Potts. In the MCU, Tony Stark seems to have more luck in the love department, at least when it comes to settling down with one partner. Tony actually does have a lot of romances in the comics, but not usually with the same person. When it comes to Pepper Potts though, in the MCU, she was it for Tony. And while he also had a lot of relationships there, in the end, he came to see Pepper Potts as his one true love. While they ended up being married and having a child together, their love was short-lived, with Tony ending up giving his life to save the world once more from the threat of Thanos, who once more returned to threaten half of all life in the universe, as he do. Number 8. Hawkeye and Laura Barton. And no, we are not talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe here, though that too could be a point on this list given the fact that the MCU is also an alternate universe from the main comic book continuity of Earth 616. Considering how everything ends up for Clint and his family in the MCU, you actually might be shocked to hear about this version of Clint and his life. Remember when Clint lost his entire family during the events of Infinity War and became Ronin before undoing the snap and helping get everyone back, his family included, in Endgame? This is like that, but it's much more tragic and permanent. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, Hawkeye ends up settling down with his longtime girlfriend, Laura, whom he eventually marries and starts a family with. Laura and Clint have 3 children together, and Clint always calls home before missions to say goodbye, in case, the worst should happen to him. Following him home one time, Clint's family becomes targeted by an enemy. They kidnap Clint and kill his entire family, which turns out to be a huge mistake on their part, honestly. When Clint finds out, he escapes his interrogators and ends up getting revenge on the person responsible, who in this reality is Black Widow, if you can believe that. Number 7. Wolverine and Hercules. Wolverine and Hercules might be a surprising one to hear about, but they're actually one of my favorite alternate reality couples, which is why I had to talk about them on this list. They both hail from the reality known as Earth 12025. Here, their love is forbidden. Hercules can't let Zeus know because Zeus decided he's the only one that gets to apparently hook up with mortals, and Howlet, as Wolverine is known here, can't let his boss, the Queen of England, know because she has outlawed homosexuality. Not only is their love story great, but I love seeing 2 badass guys like this get together and become one of the most epic power couples. Number 6. She-Hulk and the Hulk. Another weird relationship is the relationship between fellow superheroes and cousins, She-Hulk, Jennifer Walters, and the Hulk, Bruce Banner. Of course, these two don't get together in the 616 universe, though there was a time when the Hulk did go into a hormonal, lust-filled rage and attempted to make She-Hulk his mate. That did happen. Well, She-Hulk managed to dodge that very disturbing and looming intimate relationship on Earth 616. In the Old Man Logan universe of Earth 807128, it became unavoidable. In this reality, She-Hulk and Hulk are implied to have become a couple that were the heads of an inbred family of Hulks. That's the thing that happened. Number 5. Wolverine and Mary Jane. Oh boy, bub. This is not a ship I would have ever expected to see, especially given the context, but here we are. This very brief romantic encounter was not necessarily a full relationship, but it did happen in the alternate reality of Earth 1610, known as the original Ultimate Reality. It involved Wolverine and Mary Jane getting together while Wolverine was actually in Peter Parker's body. It was pretty awkward because Peter only really found out about it later in probably one of the weirdest and worst ways possible. That is, he found out that while Wolverine was in his body, he somehow found some time to put the moves on MJ, who asked Peter later, once he was safely back in his body, to wait till they were older before he tried to do what he attempted earlier that morning. She didn't know it wasn't Peter in there, and I gotta say, yikes. Number 4. She-Hulk and Hawkeye. In an alternate reality spun out of a what-if story, She-Hulk and Hawkeye actually end up together. They even have a son together. Their son's name is Clint Barton Jr., and his hero codename is Mustang. These two end up together in the reality of Earth 9811, which comes to us out of What If Volume 2, Issue 114. In this reality, the heroes never leave the initial battle world, and since they never leave, they end up settling down with one another and having children. She-Hulk and Hawkeye seem like a strange pairing, not just because She-Hulk has super strength and Hawkeye is simply a very skilled, non-powered human, but also because I'm not really sure what they have in common, other than heroics? But clearly they must have found something else to bond over, I'm sure, because, they end up together and they have a son together, so. Must be something there. Number 3. Storm and Quicksilver. Storm and Quicksilver might sound like a couple that would normally have nothing in common with one another, and in the main reality, I'd say you'd be pretty right about that. But in the Age of Apocalypse reality, their relationship oddly makes sense. Here, Quicksilver is much more serious, and both of these mutants happen to be on the same team, that of Magneto's X-Men, which exists in place of Professor X's version of the team, since in this reality, Professor X was killed before he could form the X-Men, and Magneto in essence does so in his place. Here, Apocalypse takes over the US and threatens the rest of the world with his dominance, and Magneto's X-Men basically rise up in an attempt to stop him. Number 2. Spider-Man and Kate Bishop. When you think of Spider-Man and romance, Kate Bishop is not usually the name that comes to your mind. But for this point, we aren't talking about Peter Parker's Spider-Man and Clint Barton's protege Kate Bishop, also known as Hawkeye. We are talking about Miles Morales' Spider-Man, who initially hailed from Earth 1610, and his reality's Kate Bishop. This version of Kate Bishop is actually not Hawkeye, nor is she affiliated with Clint Barton. She's just a classmate of Miles's, whose parents happen to secretly be like Hydra agents. Here she ends up dating Miles Morales' Spider-Man, at least until her parents' secret is revealed, resulting in them basically kidnapping Miles. That'll ruin a relationship, am I right? Number 1. Yukio and Negasonic Teenage Warhead. I actually love this ship, even though it's kind of a weird one when you consider both of these characters' main reality counterparts. For one thing, Negasonic Teenage Warhead doesn't even look like her comic book self in the Deadpool movies, which will soon be incorporated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe canon with Deadpool 3. Or rather, she doesn't look like her character originally did, I should say, in the comics. The cinematic version has actually become so much more iconic that this version of the character from the Deadpool films has actually caused the comic book version of the character's appearance to change, so that now she actually resembles almost identically her cinematic version. Yukio, on the other hand, is just different in the sense that she is from an entirely different generation of comics in comparison to Negasonic Teenage Warhead in terms of when they both first appeared, which would make her by comparison much older. However, I do love that they decided to give us a gay teenage Yukio in the Deadpool films, because Yukio is one of those characters who was for a long time implied to be queer in the comics, but due to the comic book code authority influencing her appearance earlier on, we never really had that confirmed. And I believe even today it is yet to be firmly established in the comics that she is gay, although if I missed something, please let me know. I think I'm still waiting on that one though, and I love Yukio, and I feel like I ship her and Storm. That would be a cool thing to see at some point, but I digress. Number 10. Wolverine and Native. Native was very similar to Logan in terms of her origin. She was also given claws by Weapon X after being captured by them. In the past, Logan and Native had become lovers after both escaped the Weapon X program, but after time and probably many head injuries, both mental and physical, Wolverine forgot about her. When he was eventually sent to track her down, everything came back to him, but all too late. Native and Wolverine were tracked down by Sabretooth, who had given Logan the mission in the first place. Eventually, Native was recovered by Weapon X, who also sent teams in to capture her. While in captivity once more, Weapon X discovered that due to a rapid healing factor, Native was actually pregnant with Wolverine's child. They'd kind of been together when they reconnected when he found her before Weapon X came in. While Native would be freed from Weapon X once more by Logan and escape back into the wilderness, Sabretooth would end up tracking them both down, defeating Wolverine so that he could kill Native, which he believed was in both of their best interests. Needless to say, Logan felt very different about that. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not let us know that you love when we talk about these tragic romances by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Human Torch and Crystal. Honestly, a relationship that a lot of folks love, but that tragically did not end so well for those involved. However, they still had a lot of happy times, so it's no surprise that this one gets revisited quite a bit in the comics. Just because they had some good times though, doesn't mean that they had a smooth breakup. Crystal ended up leaving Earth because she couldn't stand the atmosphere and all the pollution. When she went home, however, she met Quicksilver and ended up breaking up with Johnny to be with Pietro after she fell in love with him. That relationship would also end up not being amazing for Crystal, but that's a story for another time. Johnny was heartbroken after the breakup, and I think for him, Crystal has always kind of been that one that got away. Number 8. Iron Man and Joanna Navenna. This relationship actually ended up being pretty healthy one for Tony, but ultimately it was his partner wanting him to be his happiest and his best self that ended up resulting in them breaking up. Joanna Navenna was Tony's fiance. When he started fighting crime as the hero Iron Man, he didn't initially open up about it to Joanna, but eventually he did tell her. Once that was out there, Joanna actually supported his career as a superhero. Surprise! However, it also caused her to realize that she would probably never really be happy being married to a superhero, and so her and Tony ended up breaking things off. Number 7. Human Torch and Nova. I've said it before and I'll say it again. For being a ladies' man, Johnny has notoriously bad luck when it comes to his romantic life. Case in point, Frankie Ray. Frankie and Johnny initially dated, but have had a sort of on and off again relationship throughout their history. Initially, she was afraid of fire too, if you can believe that, although we'd later find out this was actually a mental block that once she was able to unblock, allowed her to regain repressed memories as well as her own suppressed flame powers that she had. She also had the power to turn herself into a living and breathing inferno. As a result, she and Johnny got close and ended up romantically entwined. However, their relationship ended in tragedy when Nova decided to sacrifice herself to save the people of Earth. She went on to become Galactus' herald, giving up her life as it was before, and taking for herself the name Nova. Number 6. Iron Man and Pepper Potts. In the MCU, Tony Stark seems to have more luck in the love department, at least when it comes to settling down with one partner. I mean, Tony does have lots of romances in the comics, but not usually with the same person, I would say. When it comes to Pepper Potts though, in the MCU, she was basically it for Tony. While they did end up being married and even having a child together, their love life was pretty short-lived, with Tony ending up giving his life to save the world once more from the threat of Thanos, who returned to threaten once again half of all life in the universe. Number 5. Wolverine and Jean Grey. Wolverine has had one of the most tragic romantic histories of any character in the comics. Usually the women he loves end up dead, and Jean is no exception. While she is super powerful, this hasn't stopped her from dying multiple times, and even when she is alive, she is often out of reach for Wolverine. The two share an admiration and respect for one another, but it's also been made abundantly clear throughout their history that they will never really get to end up with one another. Wolverine either is left struggling with the unrequited nature of his love for Jean, or is left to bury her. However, I will say that while this love story has failed multiple times over, there is a glimmer of hope for Logan and Jeannie. During the Krakoan era, they lived on the blue area of the moon in the summer house together, where Jean's room was in the middle between two adjoining rooms, one belonging to Scott Summers, Cyclops, often her husband in the comics, and one belonging to Wolverine himself, her often forbidden love, who also lived there with the Summers family. So there might be hope for them yet, if not as a couple, then maybe as a throuple? Number 4. Mystique and Azazel. While the love affair might have been rewarding in its own way for Mystique and Azazel at the time, the fact remains that it resulted in disaster for baby Nightcrawler, their son. And also, actually, I would say Mystique was pretty broken up by this one. Mystique also ended up being literally chased by an angry mob because of the appearance of her newborn babe, who like her was a mutant and who like her was also blue. Mystique was married at the time that she and Azazel got together. Tragically for her as well, Azazel left her and basically said to just raise their child as if it was her husband's and not his. Her husband was not a blue mutant, but instead the human man, Christian Wagner. So of course, when she gave birth to a blue baby boy, also losing control of her shapeshifting abilities while giving birth, everyone freaked the heck out. Eventually, she and her baby would be chased out of the town, forcing Mystique to become separated from little Nightcrawler, who, thank goodness, would make it and ended up being taken in by Margali Zardos and the traveling circus that she worked for. Number 3. Mystique and Destiny. While this may be one of my favorite relationships in all of comics, the romance between Destiny and Mystique is filled with tragedy. In fact, the fact that Mystique was ever with Azazel might be one of the most tragic parts of this relationship. When Chris Claremont wrote these two women in the 80s, his intention was always for them to be lovers, and even more interesting, he actually wanted Mystique to be Nightcrawler's father, with Destiny being her mother, with Mystique basically shapeshifting into a man and laying with Destiny, resulting in the conception of Nightcrawler. Pretty wild idea for the time. However, the Comics Code Authority banned queer relationships in comics, so instead, their romantic relationship would kind of be forced to remain subtextual for much of their early history. Mystique would instead be shipped with Azazel to explain Nightcrawler's biological origin, and eventually Destiny would die in the comics in 1989, with her death breaking Mystique's heart. So all in all, there's a lot of tragedy there. But not anymore, now they get to be together, woo! Number 2. Wolverine and Mariko. Look, Wolverine has just had too many tragic love stories for me to not talk about more of them. And not to mention one of his greatest romantic losses, the death of Mariko Yoshida, which he was forced to participate in after Mariko was poisoned. Wolverine and Mariko initially had a very successful and forbidden romance. Mariko was initially betrothed to a brutal man who mistreated her as the daughter of the head of Clan Yoshida, a criminal organization. However, after her father's death, she is able to become the head of that organization and make some changes. She initially was going to marry Wolverine, but their wedding got called off after Mariko decided she wanted to cleanse Clan Yoshida of its criminal ties. It was during this time that an assassination attempt was made on her life and succeeded, with her being poisoned and begging Wolverine to end it so that she wouldn't suffer from the poison. Number 1. Hawkeye and Moonstone. This relationship almost ended with the end of the world. Moonstone is Carla Sofin, a psychiatrist who enjoyed using her knowledge of psychology to torment and manipulate her patients. She would end up acquiring a powerful stone known as the Moonstone, which gave her both her name and her powers as a villain. However, she also was on the Thunderbolts team, initially posing as heroes but really villains under Baron Zemo. But after being exposed, she actually decided to stick around and attempt to become a hero for real under the leadership of Hawkeye. The two ended up in a romantic relationship, but when Project Liberator went wrong, overloading Carla with apocalyptic power, Hawkeye was forced to defeat her to save the Earth, ending their relationship. Now, he didn't want to have to use force against Carla, but simply she was overwhelmed at the time and she just could not be swayed by his words, so Hawkeye had no choice. All in all, I feel like they both kind of feel like they failed in that relationship. Number 10. Dr. Doom and Victorious. The wild thing about Doom and Victorious is that this is probably the most healthy relationship Doom has actually ever had. Dr. Doom doesn't actually have a lot of luck when it comes to ladies and his relationships with them. With Victorious, the two of them were supposed to get married. However, this didn't end up working out in the end because it turned out that Victorious had actually slept with one of Dr. Doom's greatest enemies, one of the members of the Fantastic Four. No, I'm not talking about Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. He's a married man. I am talking about the famed ladies' man of the group, the Human Torch, aka Johnny Storm. This ended up happening when Victorious and Johnny basically thought that they were not gonna make it, that they were maybe about to die. So Victorious never really meant to hurt Dr. Doom, but right before they were about to get married, she found that she had to say something about it. She just had to get it off her chest. So she was honest with Dr. Doom and told him that she had in fact slept with Johnny. This ended the wedding and of course sent Dr. Doom into a rage, which was pretty crazy, especially after he had just promised everyone that came to his wedding he wasn't gonna harm them. Victorious and Dr. Doom had never really had a super romantic relationship though. However, they've been quite close as friends and it seemed almost like romance could blossom out of just this. Great friendship, trust, and the loyalty between them, which obviously kind of ended up being somewhat broken with this revelation. With Victorious being considered one of Dr. Doom's greatest soldiers, though still pretty sad. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button. Also, if you like all the drama that comes with superhero romances and comic book romances, I should say. Number 9. Storm and Black Panther. A lot of folks ship these two. I ship these two, and yet just because we want them to be together doesn't mean that they can be together. Black Panther and Storm have had a long romantic history, extending all the way back to when they themselves were basically teens. Later in life, they came together again, and the passion between them reignited, with them even getting married. For a while, they were the ultimate power couple in comics, but then Avengers vs. X-Men happened, and they were torn apart when Storm decided to side with the mutants. This was after Namor, as one of the Phoenix Five, had brought down a tsunami on Wakanda. Black Panther basically felt that Storm had abandoned the people of Wakanda, but Storm didn't really see it that way. While they were forced to separate and divorce, causing Storm to give up her position as Queen of Wakanda as well, these two still harbor great love for each other, so there's always hope that they could get back together, and honestly, even if they don't, we know they love each other. Come on. Come on, T'Challa, I know you love Storm, and Aurora, I know you love T'Challa. Number 8. Guy and the Human Torch. If you can't make it work with literally someone who is supposed to be your actual soulmate, then who can you make it work with? This is the question I'm forced to ask about Johnny Storm, aka the Fantastic Four member known as the Human Torch. Johnny has had a lot of challenges when it comes to his love life, and honestly, a lot of scandal. One of the most shocking revelations in the romance department for him recently was when Victorious confessed that she had actually slept with Johnny during the time he was with his current partner, Kayla, aka Sky. Johnny wasn't so sure if he felt the connection to Sky at first, but she claimed that she was actually his soulmate. Just as they were starting to get closer and he was really starting to open up to her, this revelation came out, causing Skye to, of course, dump Johnny. Now granted, it should be noted that he and Victorious actually slept with each other in a scenario where basically they didn't think they'd be making it out alive. But still, it's not a great look, because you never know, you might be making it out alive, especially if this is a story that's told in a comic book. Unfortunately, I don't think comic book characters are always aware that they're in comic books, so you know how it is. Number 7. Wolverine and Mystique. I mean, clearly we knew this one wasn't going to work out very well. The relationship actually goes way back to when Mystique and Logan actually were partners. After both being captured and sentenced to death, Mystique convinced Logan to join up with her and rob a bank. They became partners and lovers, but in the end, Mystique betrayed Wolverine and left him with nothing, literally kicking him out of a moving train. Needless to say, their relationship has never really recovered, and at one point Wolverine almost killed Mystique, but instead decided to just basically leave her for dead. Spoiler alert, she didn't die, and the long-standing feud between them would continue on. Number 6. Hellcat and Hellstrom, or Hellstorm, depending on where he's at mentally. Goodness, did this one end badly. Hellcat and Hellstrom were seemingly a superhero match made in heaven, initially. But with the darkness of Hellstrom's heritage, this was not meant to last, and they quickly became a superhero match literally made in hell. Eventually, Hellstrom would give in to his darker side, turning away from Patsy. Their romance would lead to a ton of pain for her after she attempted to save Damon's life by restoring his dark soul to him. Seeing the dark soul return to him, though, without anything to protect her from that sight, took a toll on her mentally, threatening to drive her mad. She would become both mentally and physically ill, as well as extremely unhappy and depressed, unable to fully recover from what she had seen. As such, when a Grim Reaper-like figure known as Death Urge presented itself to her, sensing her suffering, she begged Death Urge to actually end it. They obliged, in essence ending her life. She would return from the dead, but dang, this was a really low point for Hellcat. Also, I believe after that happened and she literally risked her own life to save Hellstrom's, he goes all evil and leaves her. Oh, rough. Number 5. Rose and Wolverine. Definitely a tragic love story if I have ever heard one. Initially, Logan, or James Howlett as he was known then, and little Rose grew up together. She was a child brought in from the town to ask as a playmate for the young lord-to-be. While James was fond of Rose, so was his half-brother Dog. But fortunately, Rose escaped Dog's advances. After almost his whole family was tragically killed when the groundskeeper, Dog's father, rose up and attempted to take James's mother with him, with the trauma of the night causing James's mutant powers to manifest, James and Rose ran away. While Logan had feelings for Rose, he never really confessed them, and eventually she was engaged to another man in the town that they'd come to settle in. Tragically, Rose never got to be with the man she was betrothed to, or really even know about Logan's true feelings, as when Dog came looking for them, Logan accidentally killed her when she got in the middle of a fight between him and Dog. And tragically, Logan was the one to impale her, which is pretty sad. Number 4. Iron Man and Kathy Dare. Jeez, this was an awful romance. Initially, these two started seeing each other pretty casually, and for a while, they were happy. However, Kathy simply could not get over her jealousy problem. Every woman that Tony Stark was around basically made her jealous, even those to whom he had no romantic connection or really interest in. The jealousy drove Kathy mad. So mad, in fact, that she shot Tony Stark point blank. He would actually live, but Kathy would not be made aware, as Tony faked his death, leaving her to believe that she was actually the one responsible and that she had actually killed Tony Stark. Unable to move through her grief and disgust over what she had done to the man she loved, Kathy ended up taking her own life. Meanwhile, Tony would recover and eventually resume the mantle of Iron Man and reveal to everyone, that he wasn't dead. I wonder how he coped with the grief of Kathy's death, considering him faking his own death kind of ended up leading to her actual death. Although clearly Kathy was not in a good place even prior to her shooting Stark, because I feel like if you have that much jealousy issues, something's going on. Also, if you're jealous in general, it usually means something's going on. If you're feeling jealous, you should look inside yourself. That's what I think. Number 3. Wolverine and Silver Fox. Speaking of tragic love stories involving Wolverine, there are of course a ton of them in the comics. One that constantly seems to return to Wolverine and plague him is the story of him and Silver Fox. Silver Fox was a member of the Blackfoot Native American tribe up in Canada. She grew up in the Yukon, which is also where she met Logan, who had settled there. He ended up being accepted by her tribe, and he began to court Silver Fox. The two had a brief but lovely relationship that ended in violence when Sabretooth came to pay Wolverine one of his infamous birthday visits. He found Silver Fox at home alone, tormented her, and killed her. When Wolverine found her, he sought out Sabretooth, and the two fought, with Wolverine intending to kill Victor, but ultimately failing to do so. And then he also got brainwashed, and It just gets worse. Number 2, Scarlet Witch and Vision. When it comes to Scarlet Witch and Vision, they have a romance that has often been celebrated throughout comic book history and also in the MCU. However, when you actually boil down their relationship, what it's based on, what it's like, it's kind of messed up. Thinking about the fact that Vision's brain patterns are actually based off of Wonder Man, who later ends up being Wanda's partner in the comics, is kind of weird and kind of wild, and honestly, it's a little bit unsettling. While we can't deny that there is definitely a ton of love between both Scarlet Witch and Vision, and even I do hold out for them too to get back together at some point, because they're honestly pretty cute together at the end of the day, even if they are dysfunctional in some ways. This relationship did not end up with a good fairy tale ending. Vision and Scarlet Witch ended up getting married. They moved in together, had a cute little suburban life, team up comic, but by the end of it, they also had some kids somehow, which doesn't really make sense, of course, because Vision is an android. He can't have kids. So how did that happen? Well, apparently it happened because Wanda was able to use a piece of Mephisto's soul to create her children, and she probably kind of did this subconsciously because she desperately wanted kids. This would lead to Wanda becoming mentally unstable once her kids were lost to her, and would also end up leading to one of the most devastating moments in Avengers history. You know what I'm talking about? Avengers Disassembled. Vision during this relationship would also end up kind of losing all of his memories, all of his emotions, and Wanda had to deal with all of that while they were together. Needless to say, they weren't able to stay together because Vision wasn't really the same person, and this only exacerbated a lot of Wanda's mental issues that she was dealing with even prior to her losing her kids. Because that all happened, I believe, before her kids were even lost, so yeah, it's a lot. The relationship would also have a detrimental effect on Vision, who ultimately would, in a way, make his own family because he couldn't be with Wanda. He decided to create the perfect family. However, this didn't end well for him either, because although he had created a family and they did have some good times together, ultimately he also kind of inadvertently destroyed them. So all in all, this relationship just ended in a lot of tragedy on both sides. I mean, not all of the family he made is gone, but almost all of them are gone, so pretty tragic. Number 1, Virginia and Vision. Virginia and Vision, oh boy. So if you haven't read Tom King's Vision series, by the way, you need to do that. This relationship is obviously coming from the one I was just talking about, which is Vision's family that he makes. If the idea of a relationship that Vision sort of created and what that would be about interests you at all, I would definitely recommend checking out this series. Sure, it does end in tragedy, but what a wild ride it is getting to that point. So even though this might feel like a spoiler, really it's the journey that makes the Vision series and his relationships with his family members and their relationships with one another so interesting. Virginia is an android who was made by Vision to be his wife. However, with her mind quickly becoming more and more paranoid and unstable as she attempted to adjust to normal family living, with Vision and his wife also having 2 children created from a combination of their brainwaves, a son and a daughter, and ending up also getting a dog, let me just say that this romance really does not end well. I could explain more as to why and what happens with Virginia and really get into it with you, but I'll keep this one a little bit more mysterious for those of you who have yet to pick up this series and want to give it a read. Once again, I do highly recommend that you read it.
Kicking off at number 10, it's Donna Troy and Terry Long. As the mirror duplicate sister of the Wonder Woman, Donna Troy was admired by many of her male teammates and a few teenage civilians to boot. So the question of why the 19-year-old actually married a 29-year-old divorced college professor is one that may never have a satisfying answer. The fact that he was divorced and 10 years older than her can be passable, I guess, but then we add on the fact that he was a complete creep with a perm who would flirt with not only the other female titans, but even his own students, and it just makes it ever so worse. Even with all that though, Terry still ended up with full custody of their kid after filing a restraining order and claiming Donna was too dangerous to be their kid's mom. At least she wasn't the one who complained about not getting help to write a paper because her partner was fighting demons and aliens. Number 9, Kyle Rayner and Alex DeWitt. This isn't so much a failed relationship as it is a completely wasted one. Green Lantern Kyle Rayner came home one day after a long day of superheroing in Green Lantern issue number 54 from 1994 to find his then girlfriend, photojournalist Alexandra DeWitt, had been very savagely stripped of her life at the hands of the villain known as Major Force. But not only did Major Force take Alexandra's life, for seemingly no reason, he also stuffed her into the couple's shared fridge. It was incredibly brutal, and in terms of storytelling, it only served to give Kyle, the male antagonist of the story, the motivation to reach new heights comics as a hero. Meanwhile, her character, who was genuinely likable and had enough going on in the comic to stand on her own, was gone forever. This act of removing female love interests to spur on male protagonists was a trope in not only comics, but media in general, which practically never happened in the reverse. After this comic came out though, the trope was finally given a name, fridging, or women in refrigerators, and it changed the way female characters were written in comics for the most part, so I guess there is kind of a silver lining to this story. Number 8. Nightwing and Tarantula. Dick Grayson, being the former ward of a guy who has notoriously bad relationships, follows suit with most of his relationships ending in some undeserved heartbreak and some serious PTSD. Take Tarantula for example. Tarantula was a villain who was trying to reform as a vigilante like Nightwing, but unfortunately, Tarantula was far too toxic. She enjoyed being a villain way too much and usually ignored everything Nightwing taught her. Well, in Nightwing 1996 number 93 from 2004, after a slog of a fight that moved out onto a fire escape, Nightwing had the Bloodhaven villain Blockbuster on the ropes when Tarantula showed up. Shocking everyone, Nightwing leaves his morals at the door. Realizing Blockbuster will never stop and that his girlfriend is not reforming, he steps aside to allow Tarantula to end the villain's life. He then has a complete panic attack, and she took that as the go-ahead to keep him down with substances and then get it on. Needless to say, they did not stay together for very long after that, but they did stay together, and that's weird. Number 7. Batman and Catwoman. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big freaking deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what could come next after the fact. Like a kid of Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne. That would be awesome. But sadly, the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. Came and went from Bruce Wayne's life, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could literally just be happy. And after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Harley, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't exist. Which, 1, that is depressing, but 2, both the Joker and Harley, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne Batman, and other villains, were working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. Well, it certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit so that he would take more of a beating. Number 6. Deathstroke and Terra. Deathstroke has committed more than his fair share of bad deeds over the years, but one of the worst crimes he's committed has to be his romance with the teenage superhero Terra. The Judas Contract is one of the most iconic Teen Titans and Deathstroke storylines, where readers learn that Terra was not only a villain sent to spy on the heroes, but was also dating and having intimate interactions with the Titans' arch enemy, Deathstroke. All of us know that this relationship was actually a full-grown adult using someone far too young for his own villainous intentions. Yet, writer Marv Wolfman has explained his intention to reveal Terra as the true villain and the one in control of the relationship. But we aren't going to pretend that that's acceptable. Terra, being brainwashed, dismantled the team from the inside out, and it completely wrecked the Titans. She and Deathstroke were eventually foiled by intervention from Deathstroke's son, Jericho, and Dick Grayson in his first outing as Nightwing, with Terra passing away at the story's conclusion, having brought down a building around herself in a blind rampage. DC chose to retcon this relationship in order to dissolve the creepy factor, which was definitely a smart move, but it's still uncomfortable nonetheless. Number 5. Batman and Talia al Ghul. While Batman and Catwoman not staying together breaks my little achy breaky heart, it's Bruce Wayne's relationship with Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, that really takes the cake for one of his worst. Bruce and Talia acted as if they were truly in love with one another, yet nothing seemed to be genuinely that way. All Talia cared about was fulfilling her father's quest for conquering the Earth, and with some rather extreme methods. That was never going to mesh well with a superhero like Batman. While that doomed the relationship from the start, the real horrible failure of the ship came later. In order to have a mega awesome child, Talia put the Caped Crusader in a compromisable position with the use of some substances. She then proceeded to take advantage of the semi-unconscious Bruce Wayne to become pregnant. Maybe the worst part here is that she birthed the child, Damian Wayne, in secret, then polluted Damian's mind with murderous tendencies and a superiority complex, and then Talia dumped the little assassin on an unsuspecting Batman's doorstep, completely throwing Bruce's life into chaos and madness. There are different versions of this tale where Bruce may have been in full possession of his faculties, but it is shown otherwise in Batman Volume 1, number 565. Number 4. Adam and Jean Loring. Once upon a time, the Justice League superhero known as the Atom had a pretty great wife, Jean Loring. Jean and Ray have been involved before Ray was ever even a superhero, so unlike a lot of other superhero-civilian relationships, they were into each other without there being some kind of weird power dynamic. Unfortunately, when Ray became a hero, things began to fall off a little bit more. Jean fell in love with Ray, but she struggled to get on board with the fact that now her life was always in danger by association, and she was constantly put in danger. It is very true. The relationship struggled because of this, and they both each had their own little entanglements. On the plus side, her cheating gave us the Sword of the Atom story, which made a lot of people fall in love with the character of the Atom. But she still cheated. He's not innocent either though. The rest of the story saw the Atom going and finding a tiny little micro-civilization in the jungle, and then he had his entanglement with their little micro-princess. Then, later on, Jean becomes some crazy powerful villain, and it's nuts. Number 3. Nightwing and Starfire. This is probably the worst of the bunch, not only because it breaks up a long-beloved relationship between Nightwing and his Teen Titans teammate, Starfire, but also because the writers of the comics retcon things about multiple characters' histories that either made no sense or completely ruined the integrity of those characters. After deciding that Barbara Gordon is the perfect fit for Nightwing over Starfire, the beginning pages of Nightwing Annual Number 2 in 2007 gave us Nightwing confessing how absolutely madly in love he is with Barbara Gordon. The story then goes on to retcon their entire history, stating that they have been in love since the days when they were Batgirl and Robin, despite their weird age difference. And then, if that weren't weird enough, the book turns Dick Grayson into a cheater. Dick shows up the night before he's supposed to marry Starfire and spends the night with Babs. So he cheats on Corey, then Dick also gives Babs an invitation to his wedding after just spending the night with her. And she wasn't even aware that Dick was still planning to get married in the first place. It's messed up. Number 2, David Kane and Lady Shiva. This one barely even counts as a relationship. David Kane was one of the mentors that turned Bruce Wayne into Batman, but he didn't want that to be his legacy. Kane decided that he needs to have a child who manages to outdo Batman's training, and he needed the perfect mate to do it with. Sandra Woo-san is one of the deadliest martial artists in the world. As a kid, Sandra and her sister Carolyn trained with each other, creating a unique martial art that they mastered and would display in spars with each other, which unfortunately gained the attention of David Kane. Sandra always held back against her sister, and in order to unlock her true potential, David removed Carolyn from the equation and told Sandra that he would do the same to her unless she has his child. And she agreed. This did allow Sandra to unlock her true potential and to become a martial artist with almost no rival except for her own daughter, Cassandra, but that's because David, being a total sociopath, takes Cassandra the moment she was born for training. Sandra goes understandably nuts and becomes Lady Shiva, an assassin, and the two did not maintain a loving mother-father relationship after that. Number 1, Aviax and the Dinosaur. Alright, buckle up. The Wanderers are a less known group of DC space heroes from the 30th century who, in issue 12 of their first series, get called to check out a planet very similar to Earth, where the dinosaurs are dying off at a faster rate than expected thanks to a gas that was unleashed on the planet. Now, one of the members of the team, Aviax, has the ability to turn into any bird he wants, and he discovers that the reason so many dinosaurs are dying off is because the radioactive gas features a type of radiation that they have not yet evolved to be able to survive. Well, this genius comes up with an extraordinary plan. Since dinosaurs are the precursor to birds, Aviax finds that he can turn into a slightly more evolved version of one species of dinosaur. So he does, finds a good-looking dino mate, pins her down, and then, well, there's no light way to say it, he bangs a dinosaur. While Aviax did stay the night, he still ends up sneaking out on the sleeping dino the next morning. Aviax had zero qualms about seducing a dinosaur and was even excited to go back and tell his wanderer buds all about it. The poor dinosaur, on the other hand, got left with a baby and a broken heart.
Number 10. Rogue and Magneto. I feel like Magneto has a whole string of weird romances that I could just talk about forever. Dating Magneto honestly just seems like it would be weird, intense, and kinda cool. Though I suppose the same could be said for his paramour here, Rogue. Rogue and Magneto had a brief almost romance in the main continuity when both found themselves stranded on the Savage Lands. But ultimately it was their allegiances and philosophies that kept them apart. You'd think the age difference might also potentially be a reason, as Magneto's daughter Polaris has always kinda seemed to have been depicted as being around Rogue's age, but nah, that never seems to come up. Granted, age isn't everything, but despite their great differences in terms of beliefs, there have been multiple universes where these two end up together, with a big part of the appeal likely being that Magneto, because of his powers, can actually physically touch Rogue, because his body is protected with a very tight magnetic shield. Number 9. Superman and Wonder Woman. Superman and Wonder Woman in theory sound like a great couple, but for many readers these two coming together really shook up the status quo in a way that a lot of fans weren't actually, well, a huge fan of. Superman, after all, has long been shipped with Lois Lane, and seeing a reality where the two did not come together was heartbreaking. And then of course for Wonder Woman she has Steve Trevor, although I feel like fans, myself included, weren't as heartbroken over the loss of that long-time relationship. I'm not a big Steve Trevor fan myself, so yeah. Booster Gold even expressed his own shock over Wonder Woman and Superman ending up together. For him, the couple was the end of the world. Literally. Booster Gold at one point has to travel back in the future in order to save his own future, but ends up being too late, as it turns out what he was meant to stop was Superman and Wonder Woman getting together. But at this point, they already have. Too late. Bye, Booster Gold, as he fades away. So Back to the Future. I love it. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more weird romances or controversial romances lists, I know I do, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already checked out our new channel, Top 10 Nerd Elite, head on over, hit subscribe, do it, it's so good. Number 8. Starfire and Red Hood. When Starfire joined the Outlaws, it was at a really weird time in her life, and a lot of that series in general was considered to be pretty weird for her character, just in terms of her personality, her characterization, and the general goings-on. Starting right at the beginning with her flirtation and kiss with Jason Todd, aka Red Hood. Starfire had lost her memories and kissed Jason to relearn his language, having no memory of her previous and probably greatest comic book love, Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, and therefore not really aware of the importance of the connection between Dick and Jason, who were kind of like adopted brothers in terms of the Bat family, which makes that kiss kinda weird. What's more, it was also later implied that both Starfire and Jason Todd slept with each other before she moved on to another fellow Outlaw member, Roy Harper, aka Arsenal. Which, I'm not like a person that dislikes Starfire and Roy together, it's just the whole thing was kinda weird. Number 7. Marrow and Spider-Man. I feel like there have been multiple times in the comics where writers have tried to shape Marrow into something she inherently is not. And that is exactly what was going on here when she ended up in a relationship with Peter Parker. Sarah at this time didn't even really know who she was, as her mind had basically been wiped by S.H.I.E.L.D., so she literally was being rewritten as a character. Literally. What's worse is that Peter wasn't just fellow Super Spider-Man to her at this point, he was a guest lecturer and is currently a professor at her university. He also becomes aware later on that Sarah is actually Marrow, and what's worse is that her Sarah persona was built by S.H.I.E.L.D. out of implanted memories. So he also kinda knows this is going on. Granted, he didn't have a lot of time to do anything about that, but still. So the two also date briefly while Marrow isn't really fully herself. So this relationship wasn't just weird and out of place, but also felt pretty shady overall for, well, multiple reasons. At least it was oddly brief, and Marrow did end up returning to a more true version of herself by the end. Kinda reconciling both sides of herself, but yeah, Sarah was definitely Very intense opposite, I feel like, to Marrow. Number 6. Raven and Wally West. What makes that relationship that I mentioned in part 1 between Raven and Wallace West even more strange? Yep, it's time to talk about the relationship between Raven and the original Kid Flash, Wally West. Before Wally West was the Flash, he was Kid Flash, and the new Teen Titans attempted to recruit him to their team. However, Wally wasn't interested in joining up, which caused Raven to cast a spell on him to change his mind. Raven basically made Wally fall in love with her with this spell. What's even worse is that even after it was revealed that he had been manipulated by Raven, Wally still found himself unable to resist and still kind of had feelings for her. Raven herself also had feelings for Wally, but things only got weirder when her dark side was revealed to him, and she actually kind of almost ended up killing him? Needless to say, the two never formally ended up dating, but the attraction continued for a little while thereafter, as bizarre and terrifying as it was, with Wally both alternating between hating Raven and finding himself inexplicably drawn to her. Number 5. The Wasp and Magneto. This one happened over on Battle World in the 1984 limited edition Marvel Superhero Secret Wars comic. Here, Magneto made Janet his prisoner, but then set her free so that he could put some moves on her, because apparently he was into her. He saw Janet as being both beautiful and brilliant, and as such possibly someone who would be reasonable enough to consider becoming his ally. I would agree, I think Janet is both beautiful and brilliant. Their talks went well, but ultimately when Magneto started talking about the electricity between them, Janet was just not feeling it. He was like, I know you feel this thing, and she was like, your eyes are nice, I guess, I don't know. She told Magneto that she just wasn't really interested, firmly responding, no, 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 when he kissed her. But then despite her protests, she basically just decided to go along with it, which is also really weird. Their intimate but brief dalliance not only felt pretty non-consensual, but then it was later revealed that Jan was only going along with it so that she could get intel and betray Magneto. Wow. And after he made a comb for her using his magnetic powers and sheer will. Number 4. Red Hood and Talia al Ghul. Well, you might be thinking, wait a minute, are either of these characters really superheroes, Amanda? I know a lot of Jason Todd fans out there who would tell you that Red Hood is one of the greatest superheroes there is. True, he does often skew more anti-hero in my opinion, but he still used his sometimes questionably moral approach to heroically help save the world and Gotham on multiple occasions, so I think we should count him. Talia, while definitely more villainous, has also sometimes been known to operate as a heroic ally to Batman as well. So yeah, she's definitely not a hero, but Jason Todd is, so it's fine. Talia actually operating as a heroic ally and love interest to Batman is actually a big part of what makes this relationship so weird actually, as Jason is kind of like an adopted son to Bruce and Talia sees Batman as her beloved, also being the mother of their child together, Damian Wayne. Granted, her and Batman's relationship honestly deserves its own point, as we've discussed before on previous weird romances list. Jason, when he was returned from the dead, had a brief thing with Talia, which in a weird way is like an adopted son getting it on with his stepmom kind of. Yikes. I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments. They're going to be like, Amanda, you know there's this whole thing that's a trend that... I'm going to be like, look, okay, this is YouTube, we gotta keep it clean for the people. For the children! Number 3. She-Hulk and the Hulk. Another weird relationship, of course, is the relationship between fellow superheroes and cousins, She-Hulk, Jennifer Walters, and the Hulk, Bruce Banner. Of course, these two don't get together in the 616 universe, though there was a time when the Hulk did go into kind of like a hormonal, lust-filled rage and attempted, very roughly so, I might add, to get with She-Hulk. While She-Hulk managed to dodge that very disturbing and looming intimate relationship in 616, in the Old Man Logan universe of Earth 807128, it kind of became unavoidable for her. In this reality, She-Hulk and Hulk are implied to have become a couple that were the heads of an inbred family of Hulks. We also don't really know if She-Hulk was into this or not into this, and it was kind of against her will. While we don't know the fate of She-Hulk really at all, Bruce himself had become old and crazy due to the gamma radiation affecting his sanity over time. It's implied that Bruce believed that Jennifer was the only person on the planet that he would be able to mate with due to their biological superpowered similarities. Number 2. Green Arrow and Shadow. Shadow is the sometimes enemy and sometimes ally of Green Arrow, who in the current continuity was the lover of Oliver Queen's father, Robert. She's also the mother of Oliver's half-sister, Emiko, who ends up going on to become the apprentice of Green Arrow. However, before that continuity happened, we had the New Earth version of her character, who was similar in terms of her skills and reputation, but very different in terms of her relationships. Here, Shadow was the sometimes enemy and sometimes ally of Green Arrow, who at one point when he was pursuing pursuing her mistook him for an enemy and fatally shot an arrow through his chest. Learning that it was Green Arrow that she had wounded, she actually nursed him back to health. But during this time, while he was recovering, both delirious and feverish, it's also heavily implied and later confirmed that she forced herself upon him. This was highly controversial, especially as there seemed to be no negative consequences for Shadow, who later gave birth to Robert, Oliver's son, whom Green Arrow wouldn't actually find out about until after. Shadow would also refuse to let Green Arrow have a say in their son's life. This whole thing is like just a lot of problems. And honestly, it was made even more weird by the fact that now and then there seemed to be like a genuine love between Shadow and Green Arrow, making this relationship seem even more confusing and even more toxic. Number 1. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. We've talked about it before on this channel, and apparently we need to talk about it again, as I saw it brought up a few times in the comments of our part 1 for this list. So here you go everyone, we're gonna talk about it. That's right, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were a thing for a while in the comics. And no, I'm not just talking about when Elizabeth Olsen, who plays Wanda in the MCU, and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who played Pietro, were in the 2014 film Godzilla together and portrayed one another's romantic partners. This happened in canon in the comics, but in ultimately another universe. Get it? Ultimately? Get it? That's right, these two were hinted at and then fully revealed to be a couple in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, despite also being siblings still in that universe. And if you're trying to give this relationship some kind of pass or some kind of benefit of the doubt, like a little one, wondering if the two perhaps, I don't know, somehow accidentally came together despite being siblings, like maybe they didn't know, this was no accident. They totally knew. It was just a full-on, creepy brother-sister romance. Number 10. Emma Frost and Cyclops. Don't get me wrong, I like this relationship overall in retrospect, but as this unfolded, it was pretty controversial. Not even just for fans reading along as this developed, but also in the Marvel Universe. Scott and Emma's relationship started as an affair, with him being with Jean at the time. Jean and Scott, however, did end up parting ways after Jean learned that Scott was having a psychic affair with Emma. Even weirder was that sometimes in their sexy mind affair, Emma would basically cosplay as Jean, making herself look just like her for Scott. It was all pretty crazy. Emma and Jean would have a pretty intense fight regarding this whole affair, and even today, having buried the hatchet now, still have their moments of sassy animosity towards one another, but then they also have their moments of supporting one another. It's pretty cute. Number 9. Aunt May and J. Jonah Jameson. This one was more shocking, I suppose, than controversial, but still. There is nothing wrong with Aunt May moving on and finding love, of course, but I don't think that many of us ever suspected that when she did move on, it would be with JJ. And even more shocking was when Peter at one point walked in on them together when they were in bed. Yikes. Also, what a way to find out that your Aunt May is dating someone. That's a way to find that out. And you might be thinking, are either of these characters really heroes, Amanda? Should they really be on this list? Aunt May is definitely one of Peter's heroes, and in the alternate reality of Earth 3123 is a literal hero, with her taking Peter's place as a spider-like super who goes by the name of Spider-Man. And so for that reason, I think we can count Aunt May today. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more controversial superhero romances, I have so many that I want to talk to you about. So please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Roy Harper and Donna Troy and The Flash. I mean, this was just a really weird time for Wally, and that is likely a big part of what made this love triangle romance so strange. What happened here was that Donna Troy and Wally West ended up together after the main continuity was reset. Wally knew of his past life with Linda and his kids, but his kids were now seemingly gone, with Linda not remembering who he was or their marriage or relationship from the prior continuity. Donna was there to support Wally through this, and the two ended up together. Roy, however, had a crush on Donna and ended up heartbroken as a result. Ouch. And then shortly after, Wally West lost control during Heroes in Crisis, and coincidentally, not even intentionally apparently, killed Roy Harper, among others. It's just a pretty strange scenario, I guess, and a really strange coincidence? Number 7. Madeline Pryor and Havoc. While Maddie is definitely more of a villain and Havoc was once a villain himself, currently in the comics, Havoc is a hero. So we're gonna count him as a hero for this list, because yeah. And he's trying really hard. Oh, Havoc. Everyone go read Hellions, go do it right now. Besides, he's also been a hero in the past as well. So as I said, he is the hero for this relationship point. What was controversial about these two? Well, just about everything. Madeline Pryor was initially married to Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, Alex's brother. Madeline was also still married, I believe, when this romance began, and then she ended up turning Havoc into kind of her thrall and her Goblin King, or at the very least her Goblin consort. Remember those matching outfits? Oof, those themselves could be considered controversial to some, I think. Although I definitely love both of those outfits. I love that Havoc just had like a matching one to Madeline Pryor's like Goblin Queen outfit. It's pretty great. Number 6, Raven and Wallace West. This is a pretty weird one, especially considering Wally West and Raven's history, which we're not going to talk about in this list, but maybe if we do a part 2, I'll talk about that almost romance. Raven and Wallace West were in a romantic relationship, which is pretty weird if you consider the age difference and also just the different stages of life that they're both in. While this relationship seems to have disappeared in current continuity, it is interesting to note that Wallace West is now a sort of student at Teen Titans Academy, while also being a member of one of the teams of the Teen Titans and a teenager. And Raven is back to being her all-around, normal, youthful, though no longer teenage self, with her being one of the faculty at the academy. That means that unless we make some important adjustments for either hero in terms of their ages, their relationship when it did happen was pretty controversial to say the least. I think there was supposed to be kind of an age tweak when that relationship happened, but yeah, if you don't know that, you'd just be like, what's going on? Raven's dating a teenager. What's happening? Number 5, Madeline Pryor and Cyclops. Madeline Pryor herself was a clone of Jean Grey, Scott's first love, created by Mr. Sinister, who is obsessed with the Summers family and with creating the perfect mutant, which Madeline was a part of that plot, but only if she had babies. So already we're not starting from a great place in terms of controversy and weirdness. There's also the fact that Scott himself only really seemed to be interested in Maddie because she so closely resembled Jean, which is also pretty weird. But it's even more strange that no one seemed to think of the two women's similarity as being suspicious and potentially the sign of a major problem, namely that Maddie was a clone of Jean. Needless to say, the relationship didn't end very well, with Jean returning from the seeming dead, having never actually been dead but just in stasis, and Scott ditching his new wife and child to join the former X-Men team, now restyled as X-Factor. The first X-Factor team, in fact. Number 4, Supergirl and Comet. Yep, Supergirl once dated her horse, but I guess it was kinda okay because it turned out that he was a real boy in the end. Well, he became one. Or he became a man, really, maybe I should say, who when transformed into a human took the name of Bill Starr, Bronco Bill Starr. It turned out Comet's backstory was actually that he was once part man, part horse and lived as a centaur. Even more odd, he also had a brief relationship with Lois Lane at one point. That's another thing that happened. While under his guise as Bill Starr, Comet would also work as a rodeo star and trick rider. I guess it takes being a horse to know how to really ride a horse? Something like that? Number 3, Deathstroke and Terra. I mean, this is definitely a relationship reveal that will leave you reeling, confused, and likely kinda disgusted. Technically, neither Deathstroke or Terra are really considered mainstay heroes, though both have allied themselves with the good guys in the past, and Terra was for a time a seeming hero with the Teen Titans. Although part of her whole reveal as an undercover baddie, as well as part of her relationship with Beast, also led us to the revelation that she and Deathstroke were together. Now, let's keep in mind that Terra is supposed to be a teenager, whereas Slade Wilson is, well, I mean, definitely an older man for sure. His hair is white, he has multiple kids. Yeah, it's just not great. Even worse, there has been added context given to us for this relationship which focuses heavily on the sexual attraction between these two. Just ick. You also have to consider the power dynamics here, with Slade being older and also kind of Terra's boss in her undercover mission. So there's also that power dynamic that is like, just not great. Number 2, Jean Grey and Professor X. This has to be one of the most controversial romances of our time, at least in my mind. Maybe I just read too much X-Men, so that's why this is like really high up for me. Well, they didn't have a romantic relationship. They did have a relationship that had some really weird romantic undertones from pretty much day one. Professor X showed interest in Jean via his thought bubbles, but claimed he could never bring himself to let her know. Not because he was presumably much older and later established to be so, or because he was her teacher and professor at his own self-created school, but because he was the leader of the mutant team and was confined to a wheelchair. And how could he ever burden Jean with that? How could she ever accept that I'm confined to a wheelchair? It just reminds me of Scott. How could she ever accept that I can never take off my glasses? So yeah, just even on the surface, this whole thing is pretty controversial. Then of course there are all the other creepy moments from across the multiverse when it comes to the professor's feelings towards Jean. What I'm saying is, there's just more layers here than I really have time to peel back and discuss, but if you do want me to discuss them, you need to request a top 10 list on all of those creepy Professor X or Jean moments, because there's a lot. Number 1. Donna Troy and Terry Long. Donna Troy was only a teenager when she met and fell in love with Terry Long, with him initially being a history professor at the college she also attended. I don't think he was ever explicitly her teacher, but that one degree of separation isn't really enough to keep the ick out of this relationship. Terry perhaps was intended to be a younger professor as well, closer in age to Donna. At one point, I think it's mentioned that he's at least 29, but then there is the fact that he had tenure and was already divorced with a possibly preteen daughter from his previous marriage, Jennifer, who we later see as a teenager. The fact that Terry Long started out as a side character who also looked a lot like Marv Wolfman did at the time, and ended up somehow marrying Donna and constantly fawning over her BFF, model, and fellow teen Starfire, is all pretty wild, to say the least, when you're looking back.
In at 10, Mary Jane Watson. After several attempts by Aunt May to bring Peter and MJ together, Mary Jane finally visited Peter's home. However, Spider-Man was away fighting the Spider Slayer robots at the moment. In her visit, she encountered both Betty Brant and Liz Allen, both also competing for Peter's affections. They were captivated by Mary Jane's beauty. Like her mother and sister, Mary Jane had a passion for the performing arts as well. She aspired for a career on Broadway or in film, and she excelled in high school productions. Eventually, Peter and Mary Jane got married on the front steps of New York City Hall, with her uncle, not his, because his is dead, Judge Spencer Watson, residing over the ceremony. Later, Peter faced a challenging quest to save Aunt May's life after she was shot, which was a shot that was intended for him, but seeking the help of Doctor Strange, they realized that not even magic could cure her, because, you know, she was basically already in the grave. Peter appealed to Tony Stark for help, and he was sent to like $2 million to cover hospital fees, but that wasn't gonna be enough. So Peter sold his marriage to MJ to Mephisto to save his aunt, who has been elderly since the 60s and beyond even the point of magic saving her. Dude, let it go. In at 9, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker were classmates at Empire State University. Initially distant due to Peter's preoccupation, with being Spider-Man, as time passed, they developed a romantic connection. Gwen was a science major who admired Peter's intellect and unique personality, unique air quotes, but she became Peter's first true love. Tragically though, Gwen was ambushed by the Green Goblin, who sought to lure Spider-Man into a trap. He kidnapped her and took her to the Brooklyn Bridge. In a fierce battle, Spider-Man tried to save her, but he was weakened due to an illness. He was sick at the time because, Green Goblin has the perfect timing. And then when Green Goblin pushed Gwen off the bridge, Spider-Man managed to catch her with a web, but the sudden stop broke her neck. Probably the most realistic moment in Spider-Man comic books of being caught by a web. Despite being alive during the battle, yeah, she was hanging there, her neck was broken, she ended up passing away due to suffocation, leading her to feel betrayed because, she had only now found out Spider-Man's identity, even though she had been dating Peter. So yeah, that's kind of messed up. Gwen Stacy's death became one of the most heart-wrenching and pivotal moments in Spider-Man's life though, leaving a lasting impact on both the hero and the readers and just, every other Spider-Man media ever. Sorry Andrew, I guess you literally couldn't save her. It was written in the stars. It was a canon event. In at 8, Anna Marconi. Speaking of a version of Spider-Man that's not the mainstream one, Andrew Garfield, let's discuss the Superior Spider-Man and his fascination with Anna Marconi. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swamped with Peter. Yet a piece of Peter was still there in his own body right? I mean, I'd hope so, because, you know, it's a freaking brain swap. That's kind of weird to begin with. Who eventually ended up convincing Otto to be a hero, although he was a darker one. Doc Ock was up to some really shady stuff while pretending to be Peter as well. Since Peter was young, handsome, and in shape, he had actual women in his life. So Otto tried his luck at getting Mary Jane to sleep with him, but failed miserably, thank the Lord. So when things weren't going well, he went to Anna Marconi, whom Otto Peter started dating. She had no idea what the real situation was, because I mean, if he had said anything, she probably would have had him committed. And while it's unclear if they ever like hopped on the good foot and did the bad thing, to quote Austin Powers, it's obvious that things were at least going in that direction. Okay, Otto was in love with her, which was a surprise since he decided to give Peter back his body to save her. But still, it's still a horrific story and like immoral in the highest order. But hey, it's a Spider-Man love interest, so there you go. It belongs on this list. Jesus Christ. And at 7, Carly Cooper. Man, Peter Parker, Carly Cooper, what is with the alliteration in Marvel Comics? Carly and Peter dated for a brief time, with Carly breaking up with him after finding out that he was Spider-Man. In spite of their past relationship though, Carly helped Peter track down the Vultures, and their leader, the original Vulture, well, the new Vultures. It was like a gang of them, and their leader, who was Adrian Toomes. Afterwards, Carly dated Detective Walker Bolt up until his death, and when Dr. Octopus switched minds with Spider-Man, Carly was the only person to be told by Doc Ock that he was actually Peter Parker moments before his death. So like the Doc Ock body was actually Peter, right? So Carly was the only one who knew that. Or maybe it was that Doc Ock told her that he was in Peter's body before Doc Ock died. I'm not exactly sure, I'm a bit hazy on the details. Anyways, Carly began to investigate if what she was told was true, and it was. With assistance from Yuri Watanabe, she was able to confirm that Otto was in possession of Peter's body and that Peter had died. She visited his grave, but was surprised when it caved in, revealing that the body had been secretly exhumed. Carly was then ambushed and taken to the Goblin Underground, where she was interrogated about Spider-Man's true identity, but hey, they still dated, it still counts, it's going on the list. Alright, I'm going weird with this. I'm not gonna go everyone that everyone already knows. I'm gonna make you think. And at 6, Silver Sable. After her mother was killed in a bombing, Silver implored her father to teach her how to avenge her mother's death. Despite his initial reluctance, Silver's father eventually saw her potential and started training her. When he passed away, Silver took over the Wild Pack and founded Silver Sable International. She first met Spider-Man while pursuing the Black Fox, and although she nearly caught him with the help of the New York City police, Spider-Man's actions inadvertently interfered. Silver Sable possesses an indomitable will and is able to resist a worldwide psychic manipulation from the goddess. She is also very skilled in hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, marksmanship, sword fighting, and gymnastics. Attaboy Peter. And she's also an expert strategist and leader, capable of quickly assessing the strengths and weaknesses of opponents. Silver Sable has even managed to hold her own against the Punisher, but yeah, her and Spider-Man dated. Halfway through at number 5, Betty Brant. Now, Betty got married in Amazing Spider-Man number 156 and then headed off to Paris for a honeymoon that doubled as a work assignment for her new husband, reporter Ned Leeds. However, in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 183, we see Peter propose to Mary Jane and her turn him down, which puts him in a pretty dark place. Wonder why? Which means that when Betty shows up in Peter's apartment in Amazing Spider-Man number 184, there are going to be some issues. However, Betty claims that she has left Ned on their honeymoon while also on assignment together. But here's the biggest kicker. She never told Ned that she was leaving him. Haha, yeah. And then she still intends on sparking a romantic relationship with Peter. He ends up shutting her down in number 186, telling her that he can't be with her, but she doesn't take no for an answer, and in issue 187, she makes her own move and just goes for the kiss, saying, "Shut up darling, just kiss me." The next panel then cuts to a few hours later, which sparks the debate whether he and Betty ended up bumping more than just their lips, and then Ned ends up threatening to kill Peter if he doesn't stay out of Betty's life. But hey, it's still a thing, and I mean it's a messed up thing, but it still happened. Yikes. Speaking of messed up, in at 4, Sarah Stacy. Look, after learning that your father isn't actually your father, but rather your mother's ex, who she cheated on with his worst enemy, what do you think that you would do? Also, you're aging more rapidly because your real father has some form of goblin serum in his system that somehow passed on to you, but you only age up physically, meaning that you're mentally 10 with the body of an adult. Yeah, you might want to skip this number, since Pete and Sarah get closer after fighting off dealers in Paris, because she also has superpowers, because of course she does. This is made even worse, because they're in Paris without MJ, who Peter didn't bring for whatever reason, but the thing is, Peter thinks that it's entirely platonic. Yeah, this just goes to show that if your partner thinks someone is trying to get with you, you should probably listen, because lo and behold, Sarah ends up planting one on her almost dad, just as MJ shows up for a surprise visit. Yeah, I think the name of this storyline, which is since remembered, is way too fitting and definitely going to be seared into my brain now. God damn it. Getting close to the end in number 3, Cindy Moon. 13 years after her imprisonment, Cindy's story came to light when the orb revealed the Watcher's secrets to the world. Spider-Man, now aware of her existence, sought to free her. Cindy warned him about the danger of Moreland, but he opened the door anyway. Feeling doomed by this decision, she ended up attacking him, but learned that Moreland was already dead. Grateful for her freedom, Cindy donned an improvised costume made of webs and adopted the name of Silk. She sought to reconnect with her parents, and Spider-Man promised to help her search for him. As they spent time together, a deep bond formed between Spider-Man and Silk, and they began an intimate relationship. And I mean, that kind of makes sense given that, you know, you're both spider powered, so yeah. And this surprised Anna, Peter's roommate, who felt threatened by Cindy's presence, although I don't really understand that because he's just your roommate. After an initial confrontation, Cindy apologized and tried to mend their relationship, but it didn't work, obviously, as you all know. But hey, that's like number 2 in like my personal, like, dude should have been with them instead of MJ, that Cindy's number 2. But ultimately in number 2, Kitty Pryde. In Operation Zero Tolerance's Shadowcat subfile 604842, it was revealed that Catherine Pryde was abducted as a baby by a Neo and replaced with another baby who grew up as Kitty Pryde, also known as Shadowcat of the X-Men. Despite encountering many similar holograms, the X-Men dismissed them as attempts to disturb them, but Charles Xavier eventually located Kitty and sought to recruit her for his school as a new X-Men member. Blah blah blah, things go on, she ends up meeting Spider-Man, they start dating. Yes, this is actually a thing. Spider-Man dated Kitty Pryde, and that's pretty dope actually. I don't know why I like this so much. Like, I put it at number 2 because I just like the fact that they dated, but hey, that's not the only person that Kitty's dated either. She crossed paths with the Guardians of the Galaxy when they rescued a young Jean Grey, and then she ended up dating and getting engaged to Star-Lord. But hey, she dated Peter before that, so you know what? That's the OTP, as the kids used to say. And finally, in number 1, Felicia Hardy. Look, I have a whole spiel about who Felicia Hardy is, but we all know the Black Cat, and I'm going to say it. Peter should have been with Felicia. Okay, I get that she's like a pseudo criminal, but like, dude, look at the Spider-Man PS4 game. MJ is so incredibly toxic in that game, but then Felicia shows up and you're just like, why am I not here? Spider-Man Web of Shadows, you choose Felicia every damn time. Okay, I don't care if it means I'm evil, I don't care about the black suit, I just want Felicia. I cosplay Spider-Man so that I can find someone at a convention who is cosplaying Felicia Hardy, and then I can just start a life with them, okay? Like, come on. I don't need to say anything else. I don't need to talk about all of this, because it's Felicia. He should have done it. He should have hit it. And you know what? When you're going through that DLC and you're like, oh crap, does Peter have a kid with Felicia? You know what? I was disappointed that he didn't. And you know what? I'm sure he was too. Thanks for watching.